Hey there, Crown Corner family. It's your host, Crown, back with another episode that's sure to keep you hooked. Today, we've got a mix of stories that'll take you through a roller coaster of emotions, from jaw-dropping moments to heartwarming tales. We're diving into the world of friendships gone awry, unexpected twists in everyday life, family dramas, and a story of bravery that'll leave you cheering. So grab your favorite snack, get comfy, and let's jump right into our first story. It's a wild ride, folks, and you won't believe how it unfolds. Let's go. These mostly involve me, 33, my wife, 36 female, a former friend of mine, Aaron, 43 male, and his son, Ethan. These are set across a 6 or 7 year period. I have way too many of these, but consider these the greatest hits. Shortly after my mom kicked me out at the age of 17, the day after Christmas, don't worry, she'll have her own post eventually. After crashing with my best friend's family, I moved into my first place. It was an absolute slum, but it was only $200 a month total, utilities included. I wasn't there very long, but at the time I had a couple of roommates, but eventually my girlfriend, now wife, moved in. Anyway, by chance, we met an old friend of mine who had moved away from the grocery store. We catch up, and after a few pretty solid days of hanging out, he introduces us to his friend group. One of these people is Aaron. Aaron was a decade older than the rest of us, but he was a big gamer, loved D&D, comics, fantasy novels, Star Wars, anime, and so on, and was basically the older brother of that friend group, who were a bunch of 20-something nerds. My wife and I hit it off with him really well. Despite my description of him, he was a pretty charismatic guy. Well, after hanging out for a few weeks, he'd mentioned that he was a super of the building he lived in. He was, in fact, not the super, and that his parents owned the place, which was true. He let us know that the apartment across the hall from him was opening up soon, and we jumped at the opportunity to get out of this hellhole we lived in. About a month later, we were neighbors. Things started out fine for the most part. Aaron was recently divorced, and his son Ethan, who was one at the time, lived with him full-time. In the beginning, he worked at the local KFC and he got free rent from his parents. All he needed to pay was utilities. Well, for whatever reason, I honestly can't recall, he was let go from KFC. From that point on, Aaron wouldn't have a job for the next 4 years. Now, I am not going to criticize anyone for not having a job, it's happened to me. However, Aaron at the time was more than capable of working. He just didn't. Instead, he played a lot of games, especially MMOs. He was always hitting up his guildies for cash or gifts. However, this got to the point where people would stop playing with him altogether. During this time, he'd often hit me and my wife up for money and gifts as well. On top of that, anytime we'd head to the groceries, he'd hand us gift cards and things and expect us to bring him home food too. Literally every time. I live in a very walkable city and don't drive, so we'd be carrying back food for this guy and his kid. Anytime we didn't, he'd throw a huge tantrum. The dad, not the son, and talk about how we were taking food out of his son's mouth or punishing him for being a parent. Because my wife and I are child-free, he'd say that we didn't understand because we hated kids. We don't hate kids, mind you. A little Ethan was basically like a nephew to us. Every once in a while, he'd also convince some of our driving mutual friends to take him on grocery runs. But those only happened maybe 2 or 3 times per friend because they wouldn't put up with him like we would. That all came to a head when he tried to guilt trip some of our friends, streamers on stream, at 1 AM for not dropping everything to drive across town, pick him up, and buy him dinner. Yes, buy him dinner. This is 3 days after they bought him a $300 gaming chair because his fat butt broke his. That and driving across town to build it for him too. When I say his fat butt, I really mean it too. He was pushing 500 pounds. Now, I'm pretty heavy myself, a lot of my friends and family are. I completely get it. However, one of the things he did was constantly eat out. Really big meals at buffet. Or ordering multiple pizzas. Stuff like that. He said he liked cooking, but he basically never did that. This did not help his weight and it very much didn't help his budget. During this time, and later, when he finally got his new short-lived job, he was always asking my wife to watch Ethan while he went out to who knows where. We're talking 5 to 10 hours at a time, sometimes for days on end. She saw Ethan more than Aaron did. We were there for diaper changes, bath, potty training, meals, all of it. My wife basically raised him. All of this without pay other than him occasionally buying us some food. Because his divorce was insanely bad, his wife tricked him into having Ethan by lying about birth control, stole his car and crashed it, resulting in him losing his car and having his license revoked. And then cheating on him with his best friend and running away with him. He was super depressed all the time. He was allergic to mushrooms, so he would always say, as soon as Ethan graduated, I'm going to buy some magic mushrooms and end it all. Really messed up stuff like that. His place was always torn up as well, the grossest place I've ever seen, and he convinced my wife and me to clean it for him, once again using his son as a guilt trip. Somewhere along the line, he had let Ethan pee all over the floor and spilled juice and stuff, so his carpeted floor was always covered in mildew. The bathroom was a wreck as well, covered in human waste, crime and more. There were also toys and trash everywhere. Both he and his son slept on mattresses on the floor as well, because they had to get rid of their bed frames. Why, you may ask? Because of the bed bugs. These bed bugs plagued our building for years, but he wouldn't report them to his parents because he said they would kick him out if he or we did. He had a washer and dryer provided by his parents, unlike the rest of the units in the building. But the dryer broke about 2 years after we moved in, and he wouldn't report it to his parents for the same reason. This meant that he and his son wore wrinkled, mildewed clothes all the time. It got to the point where he convinced my wife to take their clothes whenever she went to the laundromat too. And of course, she was paying. Somewhere along the line, he got bitten by a spider on his leg, which nearly had to be amputated due to necrotizing. This was apparently a combination of him not going to the ER soon enough and something about his diabetes. Luckily, after making all these plans with us to take care of him throughout his recovery, his leg was intact. However, he would then go on to use his rotten leg, his words, to milk more sympathy out of everyone around him. Thankfully, his dad, who also owned some local car washes, ended up hiring him to be a car washer to bring in a bit of money here and there. Don't get me wrong, his parents were abusive jerks, I get it, but after working there for 1 year, he got into a huge fight with his dad about being late all the time and quit. At this point, his dad also started charging rent. Because of that whole debacle, we started making big meals for both households to keep his food costs down, all while still providing free grocery pickups, childcare, laundry service, cleaning, and so on. By this time, Ethan was in school as well, so my wife would walk him to and from before taking care of him in the evening. We also started giving them $500 a month to help him get back on his feet, with the promise that he would look for a job. Right out of the gate, he said he wouldn't do anything that had him on his feet because of the rotten leg. Fair, I guess. But he also wouldn't work a temp job or at a call center. Also, because of driving, it had to be within walking distance, but not too far because of the leg and his weight. So the only jobs he could do were online. So instead of looking for data entry or something, he decided he wanted to be a streamer. Screw me. That summer, his AC broke along with his oven. Again, instead of reporting it to his dad, the landlord, who was responsible for these things, he begged me and my wife to pay for the fixes. Well, around this time, I got an offer to move into an apartment complex literally only 3 miles away that was exclusively for artists. I was a full-time artist, working in game dev and doing some freelance photography and graphic design on the site. So this was a huge opportunity for me. Well, guess what? He started guilt-tripping me and my wife about it, saying that if we moved away, he'd never see us again, and that we were being unfair to Ethan. 3 miles. That's all. Honestly, I guess he was right, but I'm getting ahead of myself. By this time, all of my friends had had enough of him. They figured he was fun enough to hang out with, but he started being a jerk to all of them too. Like for instance, storming out of multiple D&D games because he didn't like how they were going, and not playing for months before coming back like nothing ever happened, and then doing it all again. No one but me and my wife would even talk to him after all that. So knowing what an opportunity moving into this artist collective would be, my friends had an intervention with me. They explained that I was being manipulated and that instead of helping him and his son, I was being an enabler and that I needed to move and support my family. Well, with much protest from Aaron, we moved. However, I would still go for visits and my wife still occasionally sat for Ethan. We also still paid him $500 a month. That was until I gave him a cookbook about cooking on a budget and he lost his mind. I told him that I really wasn't comfortable with him wasting all the money I gave him on junk food, that he should at least try to cook healthy for him and his son. At this point, Ethan was getting bullied for being overweight and his teachers had started saying things. I told Aaron that I wasn't going to enable him and that if he wanted my help, he was going to need to make changes. He was furious, saying that I was just like his dad, who had abused him physically, psychologically, and financially his entire life, and that he was going to do whatever he wanted with his money, and that if I stopped paying him, that I was abusing his child. He told me that if I was going to do that, he'd never speak to me again, and that would be unfair to Ethan. I straight up told him that was bull and that we can still be in each other's life. But at this point, I felt I needed to remove money from the equation, and he told me that I was making this decision to never see him again. But that was enough. I told him to have a good life. A few years later, I got a phone call from him asking about helping him get into his Minecraft account, which I had gifted him, but I couldn't help. And also I got a message from Ethan asking if we could see each other. I didn't respond because I didn't want to risk being manipulated by his dad again. I literally still get nightmares about him nearly a decade later. I know that a lot of this was my fault for not setting boundaries, but I didn't know that at the time. I'm just trying to move on now. And that move I made? Best thing I've ever done. The collective helped support my indie game studio, so we're doing good things, including showcasing at the freaking Smithsonian. And now I am the property manager for the building, and I also manage their community gallery. Seriously, life-changing stuff. I hope this was a good post. If you'd like more about Aaron, like the time he bashed the door into my head repeatedly because I wouldn't take Ethan to the movies on our adults-only trip, him, me, my wife, and another friend despite his sister agreeing to babysit, let me know. Edit. Here are a few common things that have come up in the comments and I wanted to clarify. CPS was involved. Ethan was considered a happy, healthy kid, and CPS has limited resources. Aaron didn't beat him, didn't even spank him compared to most of their cases. CPS was fine with all this. They just gave lists of things to be improved as always were by their next visit. Yes, Aaron was a bad person, but low on the totem pole by CPS standards. The reason I put up with this is largely because this started basically right after high school for me. Up until that point, I was living with my own abusive, narcissistic mother. Aaron made us feel like he was family, and before we knew it, I'd slipped back into a similar situation like the one I was in with my mother. Abuse sucks and doesn't always make sense unless you've lived it. As for my wife, her story is her own, and I won't speak on it. So this happened to me 4 years ago. I will keep it as pertinent and to the point as possible as to not bore you all. In 2009, I was traveling up to New York. I flew in and was waiting for a shuttle to take me to Colombia. I put a bag in the shuttle and realized I had left the bag inside the airport. I went to get the bag, came back, and the shuttle had departed, with my bag inside which had my computer in it. I ended up tracking my bag to the company's office and took a taxi to get there, albeit 2 days later. I got to the office, opened my bag up, and my MacBook computer was gone. I was very upset, but I kept my cool as I pretty much felt I was hell out of luck. Now this is where the story gets interesting. After traveling home a day later, I got an email from Apple thanking me for contacting them about my computer. Knowing I had done no such thing, I contacted them to explain to them what had happened. They immediately agreed to help me and told me to locate my serial number from my receipt. And this is why it's always important to keep receipts, everyone. I gave them the number and they were able to track the computer back to New York and even have the name of the individual who had the computer. With this information, I contacted the shuttle company, and after so many phone calls with higher-ups of getting nowhere, and them basically telling me that I was hell out of luck, I gave them the name of the individual. Their demeanor immediately changed, and it turns out it was one of their employees who had my computer. They agreed to refund my money as long as I would not release personal information such as names, the company name, and so on. With the information I had, I decided to become a vigilante. I contacted the individual posing as an Apple genius, telling him we could upgrade his computer under a promotion for no cost. All he had to do was bring it in. He brought the computer in and was arrested on the spot. Hey K-Korner crew, if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit that like button. It really supports the channel. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. Your comments and likes are what keep this community thriving. So drop your thoughts below and join the conversation. Alright, back to our storytelling marathon. Little background. My uncle, 52, loves photography and owns and runs a studio from his house. The house is a two-story building, with a studio on the ground floor and a two-bedroom apartment on the first floor. He lives with his wife and daughter. Currently, his business has taken a blow due to pandemic and as well as a new gen phone. Everybody has a camera nowadays, so who needs a photographer? Still, my uncle earns enough to get by for his family. He's a very sweet guy, and even though money is short, he has made a lot of friends in the community. He's one of the 3 children of my grandparents. My mother, 54, the eldest, and a youngest sister, 48, who is the entitled Karen of this story. The youngest sister has always been the golden child to my grandparents and has been spoiled to the core. From childhood, she gets everything she wants. My uncle wanted to study law, but my grandparents spent all the funds for his college for Karen's marriage. In my country, it is expected that the male child of the family will take care of his parents, while the female child goes to her husband's family. The story: even though my grandparents stayed with my uncle, my grandpa kept sending money each month to Karen, which he spent on clothes and makeup, only keeping some amount for himself just for food, which he refused to share with my uncle and his wife and daughter. The house belonged to my grandmother, and when she died in 2018, she gave the house to my uncle and some money to my mother and my aunt. And my aunt convinced my grandpa to come live with her. On the pretext of caring for him, she wanted to mooch off my grandpa's pension amount. My uncle, being a smart A, made my grandpa sign an affidavit that he is willingly going to his own daughter's house and he's not being kicked out. After that, my uncle and my mother went no contact with their sister and father. After a few months, suddenly one morning, my uncle is startled by continuous loud banging at the door. He went to the window to check to find Karen, who is demanding to be let in, screaming at the top of her lungs that this is her house. I guess she was on crack or something. My uncle laughed and told her to get lost, so she called the cops. The cop, who was also a friend of my uncle, came and basically laughed at her and told her to shut up and was removed from the property. After a few days, my aunt sent an eviction notice to my uncle. There was an attached notice which said that in 2015, 3 years before her death, my grandmother had signed a will to give away the house to my aunt, and hence, she is now the owner. If evicted, this would mean that my uncle and his family will not only lose their home but also their business. After reading the notice multiple times, he noticed the date on which the will was signed, and he was realized something which made him pissed. As I had said earlier, even though my uncle had less money, he had lots of friends. He contacted his friend at the local hospital to get data and my grandmother's medical history and records for 2015. After receiving the documents, my uncle hired a lawyer and sent a new notice to my aunt, basically warning her that the will she has sent is a forged document, and if she pursues with the same, and if she continues what she's doing, he will take legal action against her and send her to jail. You see, my friends, my grandmother couldn't have signed the will on the said date, as during that whole week she had been admitted in a local hospital for chest pain and was heavily sedated and had been barely awake. This shuts up my aunt, and till date has never made an attempt to take away the house. It was a beautiful summer day in the park, and I was sitting on a bench waiting for my mom to come back with my hot dog sandwich. I was feeling a little down because my crutches were giving me a hard time that day, but I was trying to stay positive. I have been using crutches ever since I broke my leg playing soccer, and it was a constant reminder of the accident. But I was determined to keep my spirits up, and I was lost in my own thoughts when suddenly I heard someone's voice behind me. "Look at you, using crutches like a baby," the woman sneered. I turned around and saw Karen standing there with a smirk on her face. She was a middle-aged woman with blonde hair and wearing shabby clothes. I had never seen her before, and I couldn't understand why she was being so mean to me. I tried to ignore her and looked away, but she wouldn't stop. "What's wrong? Can't walk with those crutches? Pathetic," she continued. I could feel my face turning red with embarrassment, and I just wanted her to go away. But she just kept on going. "And you're taking up too much space on this bench. Move over," she demanded. Then all of a sudden, she starts accusing me of hitting her son with my crutches earlier and that she's taken them away to teach me a lesson. "Lady, I didn't leave this bench and don't know what you're talking about." After she reached out for my crutches and took them, she proceeded to leave while calling me slurs. I was shocked and overwhelmed, and sadly I was ready to cry at that point. But thankfully, that's when my mom returned with my hot dog sandwich. She saw what was happening and immediately stepped in. "Excuse me, but you need to stop harassing my son and give him back his crutches," she told Karen firmly. "I'll do what I want, old lady," Karen chomped back. My mom was taken aback by Karen's hostility and she tried to take my crutches from her. But Karen wouldn't give them back, and in a fit of anger, she shoved my mom to the ground. My mom quickly got back and took out a can of pepper spray. "You leave us alone, or I will use this." My mom warned Karen, holding up the pepper spray. Karen just laughed and tried to walk away with my crutches, but my mom sprayed her in the face. Karen stumbled and fell to the ground, screaming in pain. People started gathering around us, and security arrived. They called the police, and both Karen and my mom were detained. Until the footage was reviewed. In the meantime, Karen was crying and rubbing her eyes, and my mom was comforting me and making sure I was okay. The police arrived, and after reviewing the footage, they arrested Karen and charged her with assault and theft. She was taken away in handcuffs, still crying and rubbing her eyes. My mom and I were finally allowed to go home, and I was so grateful for her support. She had stood up for me and protected me from Karen's bullying, and I knew I could always count on her. It's been 6 years now, but I will never forget that day. I learned that it's important to stand up for yourself and others, and to always treat people with kindness and respect. And I'm grateful to have a mom who is willing to fight for me and always has my back. And that's a wrap on today's episode, folks. From unexpected twists of fate to heartwarming courage, today's stories remind us that life is full of surprises. Whether it's dealing with difficult people or finding strength in challenging times, there is always a lesson to be learned. I hope you enjoyed these stories as much as I did sharing them with you. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and spread the K-Korner vibe. Keep the comments coming and let us know which story resonated with you the most. Until next time, this is Crown, signing off.